if there is not profitability in it, it's not a philanthropic adventure for people, right? Like there does need to be some sort of level of a benefit for the landlords. Otherwise, they don't participate in the market, and they go and they say, well, rather than rent out a property to a complete stranger who I am very limited in how I can check on them, how I can even, look up information or bring them into my home. If they stop paying me rent, I have to go through all this procedure to try and maybe get the money back. If they destroy my property, I've got half a month of rent. And what does a half a month of rent buy you to fix anything, right? I mean, geez, you couldn't even replace a carpet for a half month of rent in one room. And then, getting them out and selling them and all these rules that have been just, loaded onto the shoulders of landlords, specifically in British Columbia. Landlords are saying, well, why the heck would I do this? Like there's no upside to me here. And in a market that's more expensive, like the lower mainland of British Columbia, you're going on an equity play then, right? So you're probably burning money month over month, hoping that the market is going to grow over time, and you're eventually going to be able to make a profit in there, because most people are not getting a profit month over month, and we're seeing that right now. That's why there's so many condominiums on the market, because people are actively losing money. Rents have come down as well, but these landlords are just saying, I would much rather get into you could get into mortgages, you could get into stocks and equities. I mean, there's a million you can invest in your business. Like there's a million ways you can spend your money that keep your money much more liquid, are a lot more profitable, a lot less risk. So what we're seeing out here is tenants are, celebrating a lot of these changes that the provincial government had made. But what they're not seeing is these units are being removed from the market. Therefore, there's less available to be rented. Therefore, there's more competition for what is available to be rented. Therefore, the rental prices potentially are going to go up because you've got limited inventory. And the more of that inventory that's removed, the harder and harder it is to find alternate accommodations when you have to. The harder and harder it is to get the best price, because there's you and four other people who are competing for the unit.
Welcome to Supply and Demand with Adam Nadler. This is a podcast dedicated to the real estate market in Canada, available now on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. Darin, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Supply and Demand. So you are a super interesting guy. I wanted to chat with you about what's going on in your market because, as many people know, our two markets seem to be like tied together. Anything that's happening in your market either comes here right after, or we seem to have a simultaneous kind of connection where when you guys are up in sales volume, we're up in sales volume. When we're down, you guys are down. The prairies and the Maritimes completely just chucking along, but our two markets are kind of seem to be locked in to a really interesting place right now. So I wanted to chat with you and kind of get a more broad view on what's going on in Canada in general. And we've got a tale of two markets here. So let everybody know, where are you located, what's going on with your market, and introduce yourself, because also you're one of the members on the board at the Canadian Real Estate Association. So you're definitely an authority on what's going on. So give us a brief interview here, a brief intro, my bad, here.
Yeah, no worries. Well, number one, I love the name of the podcast there. That's was that just out of the blue, or did that take some thinking behind
There is very little thinking in what I do in general, so no.
that? All right, we share that in common. No, I'm only joking. That's no, it's an awesome name. My name is Darin Germyn. I'm based out of Surrey, British Columbia, which is, for anybody that's not familiar with the British Columbia market, it's kind of a suburb of Vancouver. It's actually one of the bigger municipalities in all of Canada, and it is due to overtake Vancouver in population likely sometime around 2029. So it's a really fast growing city, really forward growing city. It's a nickname is City of Parks. Just to make everybody a little bit jealous, we're filming this or recording this in the summertime, and I live in a little border town, so kind of on the border of Surrey. There's another town called White Rock, and I'm kind of right in that area. So it's about 10 minutes to the beach, just the most beautiful community ever. And just get to enjoy all the great stuff that comes along with that during this season. So been certainly enjoying it, and very very fortunate to call this area of the country home. So been selling real estate since 2007. So you'll love this, Adam, because I don't know if you've experienced this yet. When we got into the business, because you've been doing this a long time too, you see those realtors who have been selling for 20 or 30 years, and their business cards, you're like, dude, you need to update your photo.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know those ones? Yeah, so I am starting to be one of those guys because I've got so much gray in my beard now from, I feel like I kinda look the same, but my beard has changed color. So, I always joke I've gotta keep it short because it looks like I spilled soup or oatmeal in the front of it because there's so much gray now, right? And, so I need to get all my stuff updated as a point of my story there, because I've been doing it since 2007. So been selling a long time. Been had a career I'm quite proud of, and been fortunate enough to be part of some really good groups. So, a group that you and I both share, which is a coaching program, and I know you and I would both agree with this. It's a outside of our work ethic and actually doing the work and applying things. I truly believe it's a large reason that I am where I am today, and that's Richard Robbins International. If there's any, or RRI, if there's anybody watching that. That's in the real estate industry. And then I've got a little bit of another side too, where I've kind of participated in the organized real estate side of things. So I think it was back in 2013. I started volunteering on the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. So the real estate world has all these different tiers and associations and whatnot. So you've got your municipal, you've got your provincial, you've got the national, and then you've also got like provincial regulators, and you've got all these other things as well. So it's a really interesting dichotomy of how it all works and whatnot. But participate on the local association from 2013 to 2021. I kind of stepped out just as COVID was kind of in full steam, and timed out more so, didn't step out, but was the chair of that organization, or the president of that organization, in 2019. And we were responsible at that time for probably, I want to say it was probably about 4,500 members at that time. So it might have been a little bit less than that. I'm trying to remember back, but yeah, I had a really good time there, and it just really was based around trying to better serve the membership, to help them be successful, to help them better serve the people that they're serving. So that was that. And fast forward to today, I'm also director on the Canadian Real Estate Association. So I've been doing that since 2000, I believe 2022, and I've been enjoying that ever since. And that's a little bit of a different lens on the organized real estate side of things, but that's where we're really watching over, or trying to help the realtors across Canada be successful, but in very specific things. So, realtor advocacy, and also advocacy for the public. The public is part and parcel with everything that we do. So we need to make sure that we're making sure that they're getting the best out of the government, the best out of the realtors in this country. We're responsible for technology for the realtors, and we're also responsible for the reputation of them. So it's been a really interesting ride, long career in real estate so far, and been loving it ever since. Every day is a new adventure. So it's been lots of fun.
Yeah, so you're a wealth of knowledge from both the uh m- perspective of your own micro kind of market there, but also from the national lens. And that's where I think that things are getting pretty interesting, and that's why I like to talk to people who are in different markets, because this is really kind of a more broad issue that we're seeing with the market overall. And it seems like, from what I can tell, it's a tale of two markets. You have Toronto, Vancouver, and then everywhere else. And I kind of wanted to get your perspective on that, and on what's going on with this market, because over here in Toronto, I can tell you in the Greater Toronto area, I'm similar to you. I'm just outside of Toronto, but still part of the Greater Toronto area. Uh, you know, th- Compared to 3 years ago, our market has done a complete 180. Where you have to approach selling with seriously anchored expectations, and there is risk involved. Whereas before, before you get the sign up, it's sold, and that's a very different climate for people to get used to. And I wanted to ask you, because I'm sure you're seeing something similar. What are you seeing there, and how would you describe it to consumers who are just listening to this? And what do you feel like is happening, and why is it happening?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yes, I sit on the board of the Canadian Real Estate Association, but I just wanted to be clear for purposes of this. These are my thoughts we're going to talk about today, not theirs. Anybody looking for official positions or policy stances should just check with the folks directly at that source. I'm going to stick to the stuff that I live and breathe every day, which is our local and provincial market and just kind of what's going on there. So the market conditions in British Columbia, specifically the Lower Mainland, not so much British Columbia, but I've always described them since about 2015 as like an emotional teenager. It just has these wild ups and wild downs, and I think a lot of that probably comes from government more than anything. I'm a big believer in free market, right? The free market will figure things out, and what that really means is we've heard and heard and heard that there's a supply crunch when the demand has been incredible. And I was just looking at some information yesterday that suggested that the amount of immigration that had come into the country, I believe it was starting in 2021, was wild, right? Like just so much. So you've not only got this internal demand from people that live here, but you've got all these people that were coming in, and real estate was a really popular thing, and there's this notion in real estate that prices can only go up, and I think long term a lot of people would agree with that, but that's certainly not the case short term. And it's not something, you're not day trading real estate, right? So you need to be careful going in with that mindset if it's not a long term investment. But a lot of people started jumping into the market for many reasons. The COVID boom, we kind of call it, but also because interest rates were so low. The government needed to stimulate the economy, so everybody was kind of getting into the market, and it drove prices completely out of control. Right, the average person and the average income. I think the average household income, and certainly don't quote me on this, but I think the average household income in British Columbia, I want to say it's like $83,000, right? It might be a little bit higher in the Lower Mainland, but $83,000 certainly doesn't buy you a house in the Lower Mainland, right? Like you're lucky if that gets you like a two-bedroom condominium in some areas. So prices just kind of skyrocketed, and the market was going to respond at some point where, being cyclical as it is, the the prices stopped making sense, and as soon as the interest rates started going up, it froze the market, and that was a really difficult time. Like I know you were selling at that time as well, and we experienced an instance where prices for like detached homes, as an example, in one of Surrey's nicer neighborhoods, prices were dropping by about $60,000 a month. That's a really, really, and they went up that $60,000 a month at a point too, which both are crazy, and both are really unsustainable. And that was a really, really hard time to sell a house. And we've got out of that now, which we're fortunate that part of it's gone. And we've seen kind of the waves of the market since then. But now we're in a little bit of I almost feel like it's a holding pattern where a lot of realtors on the street in my market, they really felt like this was the year of the comeback, right? Like they're like 2025, this is it. It's been relatively difficult to sell real estate for a lot of people since about the spring of 2022. And between 2020, the spring of 2020 and spring of 2022, I would argue, it was probably too easy to sell real estate for a lot of people. But since we've seen those rates come up and the demand really soften and people start really rethinking does it even make sense to own a house because maybe I can rent for cheaper and I don't have the upkeep and all these sorts of things. We've been in this kind of holding pattern. Then, and I mean, this is only my personal opinion. I'm kind of curious what you think about this as well. But in comes February 2025. And what happened in February 2025? Somebody got elected as the president of the United States of America, right? And there was probably a lot of optimism that that would be good for the real estate market. I certainly got that impression by all the podcasts that I listened to, real estate gurus and experts and, agents on the ground and stuff like that. But in came the tariff talk, right? So my market certainly, and your market is no different. BC has a really big industry for critical minerals, forestry. There's everybody is very reluctant right now because I don't think the numbers quite are there that are supporting that the economy has really suffered. But certainly there's a lot of concern, I would say, out there about the future of the economy and job security, and everybody's somewhat affected by what has been going on, and the the conversation is just like a ping pong game, right? Like, it changes all the time and it's back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then I just don't really think anybody knows what's going on. And there's one thing I've learned over 18 years so far of selling real estate is that the market likes certainty. When it feels unclear, people hesitate. And fairly enough, if you were making your most valuable purchase that you've ever made in your life, and you've saved every dollar, and you've worked for 10 years to come up with a down payment, and you thought that that investment, or and not everybody looks at it as an investment, but I think a lot of people do. It's a primary residence for a lot of people, but it's also an investment because they could rent. And they look at that and they say, well, shoot, if that has the potential of being a little bit cheaper tomorrow, why would I do something today? So a lot of people in this market, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, Adam, too, because you asked about our local market as well, is I feel like a lot of us, us being realtors, we're really just waiting for people to trade properties. We've really lost that first time buyer, that, getting into the market. And to me, that's kind of a domino. That's the domino that, and I don't have any stats to back that up, but that's what I feel in my business and in my travels, is that first time buyer for the most part has been really, really tough to find. And they're the ones that are knocking down the dominoes of, maybe they buy the condominium that allows the person in the condominium to buy the townhome, which allows that person to buy the detached home, and kind of creates that cycle. What I'm finding now is, well, I would love to buy your house, but I need to get my house sold. And somebody wants to buy my house, but they need to get their house sold. And it's everyone kind of trading trading houses without the insertion of that first time buyer into the conversation, which knocks down a lot of those dominoes often. So that's what I'm finding more often than not. Our condominium market specifically is really struggling, and I think yours is too. And that is the natural first progression for a first time home buyer, is to get into the market, get something that's affordable, something that gets their foot in the door and allows them to start growing that equity. And they're just not convinced that, lately anyways, in the last few months, that it's been the time to do so. Uh, are you kind of seeing the same thing in your market as well?
Totally. We have lost the first time buyer. And because our condo market was made up somewhere between 60 and 70% of it was investors, and those guys have been basically they've bled out. They're kind of just about done. They're not looking to invest because, at the end of the day, when interest rates go up, holding costs skyrocket, maintenance fees, everything has kind of just inflated into, the stratosphere. You kind of end up as a landlord looking at this investment and going, well, there's no return here. This is now, especially with the landlord tenant board being what it is in Toronto, which is damn near frozen solid. Like, you can't get somebody out if they're not paying rent. You're kind of screwed. It's become a high risk and low yield investment, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
And so not only is there no cash flow, but now there's no equity play. And so what you get is you get investors all just jumping ship and saying, I got to get the hell out of this thing. Even if I take a loss, just get me out because this is stupid. It's not working. And they'd rather put their money, into the Mag 7 or wherever else where they know they can get a safer yield, where they don't have tenant risk or any kind of other holding cost risk that is going to be, insurmountable. Right. And that's kind of where we've seen them kind of just jettisoned from our marketplace, which has hurt the condo market in a huge, huge way, right across the board, right across the Toronto real estate board. And then you take that and then add into it interest rates kind of, I don't know, let's call it 4xing over the last 3 years. First time buyers, their wages have not kept up. They cannot just jump into this market. They can't get their foot in the door. And, it's not their fault that they have also just been essentially financially barred and restricted from entering the real estate market. And that has put a huge amount of pressure onto the overall market because, like you said, we have lost the first step of the property ladder. Without first time buyers, you cannot get people moving up. And in Canada, there are only two things that we're obsessed with. It's hockey and real estate. The that
It's
those
very
are the
true.
those are the two things that everybody's always talking about. You go to any dinner table, that's the topic of conversation. And when people can't move up, when people can't improve their living situation, when people can't actually see themselves able to grow their family with more space, you get a frozen tundra wasteland of a real estate market. And we, as people trading in the industry are, I mean, realistically, we're price agnostic. We don't really, it's not one way or another for us. If prices are going up, prices are going down. For us, it's transaction volume, right? Are there transactions happening? And right now there are not. And when we're at for our market anyways, we're at like a 30-year low, right? We're akin to the 90s right now, but our population is, who knows how much bigger it is compared to the 90s and how much more there is out there, more people, more infrastructure, more housing than there was in the 90s. And you can imagine we're back to that level of sales volume. I mean, that's a pretty big problem. So when you look at those numbers, yeah, absolutely. It's a huge problem. And our market is not going to recover anytime soon. I know personally in my market where, I do a lot of detached homes, the trickle effect upwards from buyers not being able to purchase condos is that now we're building up inventory and we're somewhere, depending on the pocket, somewhere between 5 and 9 months of inventory. When you get into pockets where it's 9 months of inventory, yeah, you better believe that consumption rate is going to cause prices to free fall. And that's kind of what we're seeing on our end. I'm seeing a lot of, listing agents putting in the brokerage remarks, motivated seller. I see a lot of that now, and it's a big, big problem. So, I mean, that's why I'm kind of curious to see, are you guys experiencing the same? It sounds like you are, but what would you say is kind of the linchpin in all of it from a macro perspective? Why do you think that it's Toronto and Vancouver that are being really hammered? Like I can tell you why we are. It's everything I kind of just said. Is it kind of the same thing for you guys over there?
I would I would think there's a few more things at play. Like I don't think it's a solution, or I don't think there's one specific thing that is causing what's causing it. Like I mentioned, the uncertainty of the world economic stage right now, but I certainly think that's a big piece of it. One of the reasons I think it is a big piece of it is because we have seen interest rates come down quite a bit since their peak, right? And what I what I reflect on is there was a time where lots of people were buying real estate at today's interest rates. Historically, they're actually quite low, and they're in the neutral territory as well. So the neutral territory just means like that's healthy. That's like we shouldn't like ideally we're not having to try and stimulate the economy or depress the economy. Ideally, it's neutral and everything's kind of just working, right? So we're actually in that territory right now. Prices have also come down. So we know that people were buying houses and condos and townhomes at the prices they are today because they were doing it back in 2021. That's kind of where the prices in our market have really softened back to, depending on what it is. Uh, I I often think that, I'd mentioned the free market earlier, and when you start changing the rules of the game, when you start incorporating new policies or laws or rules that either advantage one group or disadvantage another, that's going to have an impact. And so, very similar to Ontario, from what you're telling me, I'm not as quite as close to what's going on out there as you obviously, but in British Columbia, the provincial government, they really vilified investors by their actions, and even in the narrative. And it's always concerning when we govern by Twitter or govern by the loudest voice, not by facts. Um, uh, Great example. I've got a pit bull, a dog. It is the sweetest, most lovable, cuddly, cute, best dog. Best dog. I was gonna say the best thing in my life, but I've got children and a wife, so I can't say that. But he's my bud. And there's many cities throughout the country that don't allow pit bulls. And even somebody hearing that, some people celebrate them and love them and understand them. And it makes probably some people uncomfortable to hear that you can go over to someone's house and there's a pit bull because they start letting their mind imagine these things. Some cities across the country have outlawed pit bulls. You cannot own one. You will. I don't know what happens. I guess you get fined or they will remove the dog or whatever that is. And they do that because they deem it to be a safety thing. The reason they deem it to be a safety thing is not through the science or not through the research. It's through opinion. An opinion is not the same thing as science or research or doing things because they're fact based. So I know the city of Surrey, where I do most of my business, they talked about doing that too, and they decided not to do it because the research is simply not there to confirm that there's anything specific about that breed of dog that's any more dangerous than any of the other ones. There's nothing. So they went with a fact-based approach rather than just trying to placate how people were feeling at the time. And you have to acknowledge how people are feeling. That's part of governing anything. That's part of doing business. Like that's important. That's part of being human. But we need to separate what's reality versus just feeling. And when it comes to investors, as you said, like who builds those big concrete towers or even the small low-rise towers that the future home buyers of tomorrow are going to want to get into that aren't currently being built because of where we are right now? It's investors. If they're not buying an investor, if an investor is not buying a unit and they're not helping get that development past their threshold so they can get financing or continue to build, they're not getting built. They're just simply not getting built. If we don't have places for tenants to call home, they go into government rentals, and that's not what they want. That's not what us as taxpayers want.
And
We don't
by the
want
way,
that.
that's not what uh renters want either. Like if I were to just tell you, close your eyes, picture a home that you'd want to live in. Okay? You'd picture one thing. And if I said, now close your eyes again and picture, instead of me saying the word housing, picture government housing. It's like, dude, my mind immediately goes to like, you know, Soviet era type of construction that looks
Yeah,
pretty damn abysmal. So I'm not convinced that anybody in their right mind anyways wants to be living in government housing. Like that sounds crazy to me. So why would we ever even advocate for something like that when, like you said, if the free market is able to bring forward, like it always has done, higher and higher quality housing over time, right? I'm not talking about the dog crate condos. Obviously, that's, a bastardization of what, living situations have been in both of our, areas for a long time. But for the longest time, I mean, for the entire history of real estate, it's worked. We've been able to provide housing when the government has not been able to. So, yeah, sorry, that's just a little tangent, but when you mention government housing, I'm like, "Man, like, what are we talking about here?" You know? Like, why would people ever advocate for that and think that that's a good idea, you know?
Well, you're totally right, and I think where the cloudiness of that argument comes from is the word affordability. So there's this notion. I mean, you and I both run YouTube channels that are quite popular and get a lot of views and that sort of thing. And anytime I post a video about rentals, and I've done some for the benefit of the tenants, I've done some for the benefit of the landlords, but anytime I post anything about tenancies or the rental market, the comments from the tenants are unbelievable. That landlords are evil and they're, money sucking, blood hungry, people that take advantage of people. And I reflect back on those and I just think these are people who are providing housing to those that otherwise can't afford it. It's not convenient at the time. They're just not in a position in their life to be able to do it or make a decision right now, or they can't get what they need because of whatever factor X, Y, Z. But the part of the conversation that always gets missed is if there is not profitability in it, it's not a philanthropic adventure for people, right? Like there does need to be some sort of level of a benefit for the landlords. Otherwise, they don't participate in the market, and they go and they say, well, rather than rent out a property to a complete stranger who I am very limited in how I can check on them, how I can even, look up information or bring them into my home. If they stop paying me rent, I have to go through all this procedure to try and maybe get the money back. If they destroy my property, I've got half a month of rent. And what does a half a month of rent buy you to fix anything, right? I mean, geez, you couldn't even replace a carpet for a half month of rent in one room. And then, getting them out and selling them and all these rules that have been just, loaded onto the shoulders of landlords, specifically in British Columbia. Landlords are saying, well, why the heck would I do this? Like there's no upside to me here. And in a market that's more expensive, like the lower mainland of British Columbia, you're going on an equity play then, right? So you're probably burning money month over month, hoping that the market is going to grow over time, and you're eventually going to be able to make a profit in there because you're certainly most people are not getting a profit month over month, and we're seeing that right now. That's why there's so many condominiums on the market, because people are actively losing money. Rents have come down as well, but these landlords are just saying, I would much rather get into you could get into mortgages, you could get into stocks and equities. I mean, there's a million you can invest in your business. Like there's a million ways you can spend your money that keep your money much more liquid, are a lot more profitable, a lot less risk. So what we're seeing out here is tenants are, celebrating a lot of these changes that the provincial government had made, but what they're not seeing is these units are being removed from the market. Therefore, there's less available to be rented. Therefore, there's more competition for what is available to be rented. Therefore, the rental prices potentially are going to go up because you've got limited inventory. And the more of that inventory that's removed, the harder and harder it is to find alternate accommodations when you have to. The harder and harder it is to get the best price because there's you and four other people who are competing for the unit, right? So the free market, the way that it would solve that problem is by having more inventory and allowing the inventory and the prices to settle for where it makes sense, right? Now, inventory is a popular thing to talk about, and we're still in an inventory crunch. That's what I find so funny about what is happening in the market right now. So many people want to try and time the market, and they're kind of avoiding it like Superman avoids kryptonite sort of thing. But we know we're in a supply crunch. So what's unique about where we are today than we weren't probably about 18 months ago is the pause button has been pushed on building more properties. So everybody that's trying to time the market, there's going to be a day and time, and it's not that far away where things are going to click. People are going to start coming back into the market, and then they're going to realize there is no new product sitting on the shelf in about a year or two from now. There's going to be nothing, right? So what's going to happen with prices then?
So this is a huge can of worms, and we're kind of we're talking about the fundamental differences in the economic approach to how we organize our society, right? Like when you're talking about the free market and we're talking about scarcity, I think all of these things tie into the real estate market, but when you really boil them down to first principles, we're fundamentally talking about the society's decision in how it wants to, govern itself or organize itself economically. And I feel like a lot of people, unfortunately, have not been exposed to the different thoughts on this type of topic. And this is kind of a bit of a it's related a lot to real estate, but really it's about anything that's scarce. And that's kind of where we're at is, I went to university, I studied economics. And it's only when I left university that I realized they had taught me nothing. And that my education now through just books, just reading books myself, and podcasts have been a great, way to educate myself, that I'm coming to realize that, like, even in university, even in those economics courses, they only really ever taught me the Keynesian model of economics, and they didn't mention anything about neoclassical, perspectives on economics or the Austrian school of economics, none of that. It's only when I left university that I discovered, holy shit, there's a whole nother wide range of economic thinking that they never even mentioned. I didn't even know it existed. And so what you're referring to is largely a lot of thought processes by guys like Milton Friedman, who I'm a huge fan of. Love his books. Um, for anybody who is listening to this and is interested in going down these super nerdy rabbit holes, Free to Choose is like, wow, what an amazing mind. And he had really done the homework on this. And you're absolutely right. The free market is always going to bring about higher quality, better production for a lower cost. Always, every time. And it's because we haven't been taught this. And you're right, we are being kind of governed by Twitter. Like, this is just about placating to the emotions of the consumer, who ultimately is the constituents of these, you know, uh, people in governing positions that are just looking to get reelected for one more term, secure their pension, move on, kick the can down the road, let it be somebody else's problem, right? Once I've finished and secured my pension, that kind of thing is a lot of what we're seeing. And when it comes to rent control in particular, um, there's a strong argument to be made economically from a foundational first principles perspective economically that it actually makes housing more expensive. And that's a big topic. There's a lot of people who might argue this, and I'm sure a lot of keyboard warriors are gonna be all over that when I say that. But I mean, hey, look, man, do the research yourself. Take a look into it, and you'll find that you have to give incentives for people to want to provide housing, financial, economic incentive for people to want to provide housing, or else they will not provide housing. And what happens when they will not provide housing is the barrier to entry goes up. And so if you're in a place right now that is rent controlled, your rent will be stable for as long as, for as long as you're there. But then those same people haven't actually looked at what it would cost them to move. And what they'll come to quickly find and quickly realize is that, holy shit, the prices have skyrocketed. And one of the places I think that people should be looking at a little bit, he's super controversial guy down in Argentina, is Milei. But what he did down there is he just said afuera to all of these things and killed rent control. And look at what happened to their real estate market. Prices have gone down dramatically in their rental market, and quality has gone up. You have revitalized the free market for real estate, for the rental market in particular. I mean, that's a good thing. We should be looking to do that. We shouldn't be looking to, and so we shouldn't be looking to inhibit the market. And in Ontario, I don't think we're as bad as you guys. You guys are real, in my opinion, like a little bit more wacky over there with government intervention. We have a premier here who has really tried to kind of stop the whole rent control fiasco, but he didn't get as far as he wanted to, right? He only got to anything that is uh, built after 2018, November 2018, is not rent controlled here. And what has happened there is, you'll notice, the natural ebb and flow of negotiations between landlords and tenants have largely been a good thing, right? You'll get tenants pushing back saying, "Hey, can I get a lower rent this year?" Right? And that's a good thing for the market. We should be able to empower tenants through the free market rather than by fiat. And I think that that's kind of what you're getting at, which I completely agree on. And again, it kind of boils down into the fundamentals of like economic principles and like, what do we want? Do we want uh, a centralized authority like the government to kind of just like lick their finger and stick it in the air and be like, well, this kind of feels right. The winds might be blown in that direction. They're never going to get it right. They're always going to get it wrong simply because, and I talked about this on Tom Story's podcast a couple weeks ago, is that it's not a function of being able to get it right or get it wrong. Because when you actually look at it, mathematically, it's not possible for them to get it right. It's not possible. Like, an economic system is a massive, complicated system. You could never have a governing authority that is centralized with like 12 guys in a boardroom sitting around trying to figure it out, able to do anything that would mathematically be correct. They're just not able to compute what needs to be computed to be able to make a correct decision, which is why the free market works. Is it's a distributed computational system, is that every single one of us, right? We are all our own individual computational systems that are weighing, measuring, cooperating, and competing against each other's own interests as a distributed computational system to come to what is the most efficient solution. And I think that that's what people are not understanding, is that that's where you're always going to have um, the things go wrong. And so, I mean, that's my little rant on it, but I think you're right. I think that the governing authorities here have really messed it up big time. They totally messed this thing up.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think we've been focused on the wrong part of the problem, and we're getting into an environment where that is changing now, for the better. And what I mean by that is we've been so focused, we being, the public mind, I guess, so focused on trying to curb demand that for years we completely ignored the supply piece of the equation. And you cannot tax your way out of this. You cannot put policy your way out of this. It's the free market is creating opportunity for people. It's not restricting opportunity for people. So by creating opportunity for people, that is also opportunity for the tenants, as an example. The tenants should have more choice. They should have more properties to look at. They should have more ability to negotiate with a landlord. But when you start tipping the scales too far in one direction, you're going to break the scale. And that's somewhat what has happened in the rental market. And people could argue, well, prices have come down not only for resale real estate, but also for rents. But that's a function of the greater economy and what we're going through. That's not a function of these rent controls that have been put into place, right? I always describe British Columbia is the petri dish of real estate. It's
Yes.
where it's
In
where the good
Canada, yeah.
ideas, yeah, it's where the good ideas and the very bad ideas come from. There's been some great stuff that's been done, and there's been some stuff that hasn't been. Some stuff that is just incredibly detrimental to not only the real estate market but also the tenancy or the rental market. And your point about 12 people sitting around a boardroom and making a decision, they will never be able to move as fast as the free market. They will never be able to make decisions as quickly as the free market. And they will never be able to balance the scales of the free market like the free market can actually do, because it will, if it needs more things built, it will tell you, because rents will be going up and it'll be very, very difficult to find things. If there's too much supply, then they'll stop building, and then that'll naturally bring the balance back up. Like, it will solve all problems, and it's not easy solutions either. You can't just snap your fingers and have more properties built, right? For either rental or for resale purposes. But you need to be paying attention to the research and the facts and the statistics about that stuff. And these are decisions that should have been being made 15 years ago, not today, not last year. Like, this is a problem that should have been seen coming. And to your point, like, when you're worried about your reelection and placating to the people that are voting for you, rather than what's right and what's wrong. And even the lines of what's right and what's wrong have gotten a lot blurrier in the last 5 years, right? Because I mean, everybody's got an opinion and they're certainly welcome to share it, but you get a lot of things that are uh, easy to disagree with, only because you can shut off your computer or disagree and put it out to the world and turn it off, and you'll find your band of people that agree with it. But we need to be doing everything for our industry, whether it's the resale, or just the home buying and home selling process, whether it's anything to do with renting properties for both the tenants and the landlords. It has to be based on research and what's good for everybody. Because if you take away from one, that means you're giving to somebody, but you're taking away from somebody else, and you're going to tip the scales and you're going to break it. And I think that's what's happened a lot in British Columbia. There's lots of people that not only bought properties as investments during the peak of the market, but they're also renting them out now, which is great, but they're taking a massive loss on them. And at the end of that year, as an example, if they did a year lease, they cannot renegotiate that lease. The tenant can choose to leave, but they can't, arbitrarily just move them out. There's certain ways that would have to happen. So great for the tenant, not so great for the landlord. Well, the landlord goes, "Hey, as soon as I have an opportunity to get out of this, I'm gone. I'm going to go put my money where it's more liquid. I have less risk, and I can get the returns I'm looking for, because I need to worry about my own retirement as well." Everybody deserves to have a place to call home. Everybody deserves an affordable place to call home. Nobody is disputing that. It's just, we need to make sure that this whole system that's been created over a long, long time is not removing opportunity from some to make it better for others, because if they choose not to participate, then the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, that's a interesting way of looking at it when with with prices in particular. Is that what I think we as consumers need to understand is that pricing itself, the price signal is kind of like the nervous system of a market, right? Like the price signal is what lets you know if more supply is required or not. And that's what entices investors to supply more, to provide more inventory, to increase supply, because the price signal is demanding it. But when you create, like you said, this type of governance by fiat that is just designed to placate the constituents in order to achieve a desired election outcome, you end up distorting the price signal. And when you distort the price signal, it's akin to, you know, completely making a nervous system haywire in somebody's body. Like you get all kinds of different horrible diseases and things like that, right? Your nervous system is being messed with, and I think that that's what we're seeing here. And as Canadians, people are not really recognizing that, like on a global macro perspective, like we're pretty far left. BC being even more far left than Ontario, and it's not really working in providing more housing and providing anything that's more scarce, right? The word economics itself the etymology of the word economics is the study of scarcity. So if we're looking at this and going, okay, well, we have scarcity of this commodity or that commodity, and okay, we have the commodification of housing, and that's a really big problem, and it's incentivizing all kinds of nefarious financial behaviors and things like that. Okay, well, what can we do to mitigate that? Are we going to give more power to governing bodies that, by the way, are just made up of human beings that are totally corruptible and can be bought and paid for, um, or and allow those vested interests to further infiltrate and corrupt those systems, or do we want to take it out of the hands of fallible human corruptible capital, and do we want to put it into a more free environment and allow that marketplace to sort itself out? And when it comes down to it, like, I don't trust, some guy who, stands on a podium and promises results. Like, I don't trust that. I don't trust any politician. Anybody who does is kind of foolish, right? Does that mean I don't vote? No, of course I vote, but does that mean that I inherently trust people, whoever they are? No, nobody should. And so I think that, like, giving more power to those people who have already failed us and continually fail us just logically doesn't really make much sense. And so I really do believe that, taking away those distortions to the price signal are inevitably going to create a better situation for everybody. But you guys have had some really, like you said, it's a petri dish of real estate legislation in Canada. I noticed that, and I actually had Steve on my podcast when this first happened, is you guys have tried all kinds of stuff that eventually makes its way here. And that's why I love talking to you guys at West. There was one thing that you guys did, and I wanted to know what your opinion was on, is you guys instituted a cooling off period for resale, which, we have here for pre-con, but for resale. And I looked at that and I went, what the hell? Why? What, like, why would you just, again, create a situation where you've now incentivized people to tie up a bunch of different properties for a due diligence period that is no due diligence. There's no reason for it. For other conditions that we have in our marketplace here, it's like, okay, it's for a specific reason, for financing, it's for the inspection, it's for something,
Mhm.
so that sellers can rest assured that they understand why somebody is putting a condition in, and it's fair, it's balanced. We can talk about it. But to have a mandatory cooling off period where someone can walk away from a deal, that to me seems unfair. I just wanted to know what your opinion was, and what do you feel like the results have been from that?
Yeah, it's a good question. The cooling off period really came in when it wasn't needed. So by the time it arrived, the market had already been cooled, and we've kind of been living that life for the last 3 years now, where it's not necessarily a tool that is well used. Has it been used? Yeah. But is it well used? No. And back to what we were talking about when you give to one party, you take away from another. So it was really brought in because we've had moments in the history of British Columbia real estate where the market's moving very quickly in an upwards direction. So it was brought in to allow people to, fundamentally, without getting into the actual details of it, fundamentally make a decision on a property that likely didn't have any conditions or due diligence attached to it, so they could back out of it. And we really removed the responsibility from the buyer to do their homework, and that's part of what the real estate professional helping them, if there is one involved, that's what their job is, right? Is to help them get through safely to the other side and avoid all the issues that might arise from whatever that transaction or that property might bring forward. So we've kind of said to the buyer bringing that in, you got an escape route here, and you have the opportunity to put in a wild offer, if you think that's going to get you the property. You can stack that offer as much as you want in the seller's favor to get agreement at the time. And normally, of course, if you're thinking about, well, when will this be used? Well, it's likely going to be used in a multiple offer situation. So you've got, all these people competing on a property and you want it, right? You want the property. So you can structure your offer however you like, but typically that cooling off period, which is 3 business days, which is crazy on its own. So that means if you write an offer on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday don't count. That means by Wednesday night at midnight, that's when you have your decision to make, which is nuts to me. Right. I guess that's a lot, to allow maybe to have a conversation with the bank and all that sort of stuff. But that has completely removed the agency of the buyer being responsible for their own decisions and detrimented the seller in a way that is really quite unfair to them. So let me give you an example. The seller in a market where something like that is happening, well, they need to likely buy a property as well. And so if they want to go buy something and they're waiting 3 business days to know if their house is sold because they've agreed to whatever terms and conditions their offer had on it, but they still have to wait these 3 business days. So now you're tying them up for a period of time where they can't really fundamentally go do anything if they're, good, honest people that aren't prepared to just pull out of an offer for no reason sort of thing. They see a beautiful home they want. They really can't compete on it because they don't know if their house is sold yet. Well, what about the opportunity costs in that regard as well? So the buyer gets this opportunity to really kind of cool off and say, well, geez, did I maybe pay too much? Like, what was I thinking? Did I do this right? The penalty is incredibly small based on the numbers that we're talking about. So, like, if it's $1 million house, if they were to back out and use that rescission period, it's a $2,500 penalty. Well, in the grand scheme of spending $1 million, $2,500, that's kind of the cost of doing business for some people, right? Like the buyer might look at it and like, okay, well, this is what I have to pay just to, put a bookmark on this house for now while I can still go out and do other things on other properties. So you're removing opportunity from the seller as well. If I'm a seller and at that time, because my house is well priced, it's attractive, I've done everything I can to make it as beautiful as possible, and I've been blessed with the opportunity to have multiple bids on the home, and I decide to go with an offer who later rescinds. Well, what happens to those other 2, 3, 4, whatever offers it might be? Did they go out and buy something? Are they still as interested? Would they still give me the same number on my property that they had once offered previously? So you removed all this opportunity from the seller just to stack it in favor of the buyer. And it's that same thing we were talking about. It's that balance of the scale. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when the market is really going to fundamentally use this cooling off period more in practice than it is right now because of how quiet the market has been. It's going to be really interesting to see how that impacts sellers moving forward because it has stacked the deck. And again, it's messed with the free market. So it's stacked the deck in the favor of the buyer. So they could write offers on multiple properties, pick the one that they get the best deal on, et cetera, et cetera. But that is sacrificing the seller and what might be best for them. So it's broken the equation, so to speak.
That's so interesting. I'm reminded of the Cobra dilemma. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Okay. Yeah. So it's an it's a something that happened in India a while ago that economists often use as an example of why governments should not be interfering with with the free market. And basically, it's the story of there being too many cobras in India, and people are saying, "Oh well, there's cobras everywhere, and this is not a good thing." People can get hurt, people can get killed, and people were. And so the government says, "You know what? We got to do something. Let's step in." And so they step in and they say, "We're going to put a bounty on cobras. And so kill the cobras, bring us the cobras dead, show us, you'll be rewarded." Well, at first, people were going out there and killing cobras, and everything was well intentioned. But then what happened? Well, the free market responded, and it never responds in a good way when you interfere with the price signal of anything, or you interfere in some kind of, you know, uh, way that distorts what how to solve a problem, which is what the government always does. And essentially what people started doing is they started breeding cobras. They started breeding cobras so they could kill them and get the bounty. And the government learned about this and said, okay, well, we have to kill the program. But people had been breeding cobras and the government's slow to react. And so by the time they killed the program, there were actually a ton more cobras. And what did those people do when they realized they couldn't get a bounty? Well, they said, why do I have all these cobras? Why am I breeding all these cobras? Got rid of them. And so there ended up being way more cobras in the end that were dispersed all throughout India as a result. And so I think that with this type of cooling off period, that sellers inevitably, eventually will react. And I think what's going to happen is they're going to have to price in their risk. Is I think eventually what it's going to cause is it's going to say, like just like any endeavor, the more risk that is involved, the higher the yield, right? And when you make it more risky for a seller, they're going to have to price in that risk. And so I believe that it's just simply going to drive prices up further because sellers are now going to take on more risk and they're going to say, well, if you can walk, well, then, I want more now because if you walk later or you try to renegotiate later, right, I'm going to price that in. And if you don't like it, too bad. And when production has been low for housing, which we are not building, we haven't been building for a while, and I'm sure you guys have kind of seen the same thing where Toronto, I'm looking out my window, there used to be cranes in the sky all over the place. We had more cranes in the sky in Toronto and the GTA than any other municipality in the world, right? During COVID, let's say. And now there are no cranes in the sky.
Wow.
And what that means is that our supply crunch in a big way is coming. Like we think we're in one now. We got no idea what it's actually going to be in a couple of years because around 27, 28, when our production at this point, because the performance for builders has completely, just spiraled into nothing. When those years start rolling around and we have, I don't know, on average, we do about somewhere between 30 and 35,000 new units a year. When we see that number plummet to half that, then we'll really understand what the government has done. And at least hopefully we'll see it and there isn't too much of like a, crazy Canadian zeitgeist for more government intervention that perpetuates it to be even worse. But which obviously that's kind of what I think is going to happen. But then we'll really understand what it is because people will be asking the builders, where's our supply? Why haven't you been building? And they're just going to say, well, because 35% of the cost is development fees to the municipalities and the governments, and we can't afford it. So either you start trying to, juice us for every last penny and we can build and make a profit and have a margin, or we're just not going to do it. Right. And I think that's going to happen.
There needs, I want to make sure that nobody comes away from this thinking like that there's not good people in government. There's not good people trying to do really good things because there certainly is. It's just the process of making a decision that often is flawed. So as you and I have been saying, like the government will never be able to move fast enough to keep up with these things. And then when it's that old it's that old example of you plug a hole somewhere else and it creates six other leaks in a different spot of the or a different area. And I'll give you an example, like in British Columbia, and this is related back to the tenancy stuff as an example, but when they introduced a policy, I believe it was in about the summer of last year, and this was that they were going to up the notice period for a tenant to be removed from a rental that was on a month-to-month tenancy. They were gonna up that notice period where the tenant originally had 2 full months of notice to be able to move out and go find new accommodations, and they could move out early and serve notice to the landlord early, so there was no problem if they found opportunity early. But they had at maximum 2 full months. So no problem, which, typically would turn into about 2.5 to closer to 3 months, depending on when it happened. They wanted to up that to 4 months. Okay. So they went ahead and they just passed it. So 4 months, fundamentally speaking, if you need 4 full months of notice period for this tenant, let's say today, let's say it's the middle of July and you give notice to your tenant that they're moving out today. That means that July is kind of a burn month. You've got August, September, October, November. Somebody buying the house in the middle of the July cannot move into the property until December the 1st. That is insane. So alone from that being insane, what's that going to do for the resale market for tenant occupied properties? It's going to decimate it. The Mortgage Brokers Association of British Columbia and the British Columbia Real Estate Association start sounding the alarm. Why are they sounding the alarm? Because pre-approvals are only good for 90 days. So if I'm a buyer and I'm purchasing a property and it's a rental unit and I buy it today, but I can't get it and complete on it until December, I've lost my pre-approval. That means I have to go in completely blind, meaning I write an offer, I cross my fingers and hope like hell that everything stays the same, nothing changes, and I'm able to still qualify for a mortgage in December. That's that and there was multiple other reasons why the Mortgage Brokers Association, there's different down payment rules with tenant occupied properties as an example. There's a few other reasons that was a big problem, but that's just one example of if I'm an investor and I want to sell my rental unit, which should be my right, and we care about the tenant. Why I would add is we also care about that landlord, and that landlord should have the right to sell their unit, and they should have their right to not be completely hamstrung by laws. So, anyways, the BC government, within I think it was 13 days, said, "Our bad, whoops, we made a mistake. Let's peel that back from 4 months to 3 months," which is a little less problematic, but still problematic. But within a very, very short period of time, they moved back from 4 months to 3 months because they did not do their homework. They did not ask the right questions. They did not invite the right people into the room to have the conversations. They were making a rule to placate a certain segment of their voting population. And it's not to say that that certain segment doesn't deserve attention and doesn't deserve rights and doesn't deserve what they need to be successful in life, but they failed to ask the experts about how this would impact the overall system. Terrible policy, terrible decision, and they wore egg on their face very shortly after because of the way that they went about making a decision.
That's so interesting. I love the real world example of exactly what this looks like in practice. And that's why I like talking to people like you because, like you said, you're right. The people that are in government are not necessarily bad people, but they cannot possibly be educated enough to make the proper decision on a free market. It's just not possible. So, just like everybody, I'm sure, well, not everybody, but I'm sure most people are pretty well intentioned. But I think who was it, Solzhenitsyn, that said the the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
Mhm.
I mean, we need to be very careful about how we tread on these things. And I like talking to guys like you because you're not only somebody who's active in the industry and has been in the industry for like, gosh, 20 years now, but you were in governance as well, right? Like you're a sitting board member of the Canadian Real Estate Association. You're the person, you're one of the guys talking to, the government and lawmakers that are actually governing on these topics with real estate. And so you have that breadth of perspective. And when I speak to people in the industry, whether they're builders or people like you who are part of these organizations that are speaking with lawmakers, and everybody's saying the same thing is that regulation is too tight. We need to step back from this. This is dangerous. When you hear people like you and others in these industries saying that and being very vocal about it and not being shy about it, I think we need to listen. I think that there needs to be an understanding from the general public that that these are important matters, that they're going to have long-term consequences for us, that the decisions we make now are going to impact the market in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, and that we owe it not only to ourselves but to future generations of both buyers and sellers and renters to make these decisions with a lot more careful judgment, with a lot more research. And so I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a super busy guy, and helping to educate the greater public. Although our channel is a very modest one, I do thank you for coming out to speak to everybody here, and just kind of let everybody know, where can they find you, because you also have a great YouTube channel.
Yeah, so if you look up our team's name is the German group, so you can look up the German group on YouTube. Also, our YouTube channel is called Living in Surrey and White Rock. So really fun channel. We talk a lot about what's going on in provincial real estate. We also do a lot about what's what you need to know, whether you're a buyer or a seller in the Surrey and White Rock and some of the surrounding municipalities. So you can certainly check us out there. We'd love to have you. And you can find us at germyn.ca, germyn.ca. And yeah, it was lots of fun. I wanted to leave with a closing thought on this too, if I can, Adam. That when we're talking about anything, I always want to believe that there's good people out there that are trying to do the best and trying to do the right thing, and they're not always going to get it right. And when we're talking about these things, we don't want to separate what we do from the public, because there's a marriage there, and it's an important marriage that is built on trust, and it's built on them relying on people like you and I to help them navigate the really stormy waters and the legalities and all that sort of stuff that comes with buying a home or selling a home. And there's so much to unpack on that one comment, but we need to make sure that everything is coming together to benefit everybody. And without the public, we don't exist. Without the public, our jobs don't exist. Without the trust of the public, our jobs don't exist. And it's about creating a framework that's going to help everybody thrive, public first, and making sure that everybody has a place to call home. Everybody has an equal opportunity to live in a home. Everybody has an equal opportunity to participate in the economics and the fundamentals of how you get there. And we need to create the framework to do that. And I'm a real believer that if we all keep working in the same direction to move that forward and do it through research based fact finding, good decision making, talking to the people that should be in the room, I've got no doubt that we're going to get there. And it's been a fun ride in real estate. It's going to continue to be a fun ride if for people that are outside of our province and not in British Columbia. If you read the Globe and Mail, you'll see the petri dish of North America, and there's always lots of fun things going on here. So I implore you to follow along and see what's coming next for maybe people like you in Ontario.
I will definitely keep an eye on it, because I'm always super interested in what's going on with you guys, and I look forward to hanging out again and grabbing a drink in November when you come in to Toronto every year for the conference. So always happy to chat before then, though, and nice seeing your face as always. So excuse me. Yeah, so everybody check out Darin online. His YouTube channel's fantastic. Darin, thank you so much for joining in.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you as well.